into the icy north, deep into the silent nowhere, came an undaunted lone prospector.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Modern Times podcast. I'm Nigel, and my esteemed panel is here as well, as always.
And hi.
And Sarah. And today we are going to dive into Chaplin's 1925 masterpiece, the film he most wanted to be remembered for, according to him, anyway, The Gold Rush.
Coincidentally, my favorite Chaplin film.
Yeah, and there's a lot of history in the making of the film, and it was the first film that he actually reissued in 1942, and he tweaked the storyline and did the narration.
Yeah.
Sarah, why is this your favorite Chaplin film?
There's just something, he's still working out. The Tramp is going through a significant change versus any time beforehand. Like, The Kid was a revolutionary film for him, but The Gold Rush had more gags, which I enjoyed, like slapstick, but it also touched on very serious issues like starvation, the cold, being very poor, and isolationism for sure, all within like a somewhat historical context.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually, some of his gags were referencing the Donner Party that had gotten lost up in the Nevada or Sierra mountains.
Somewhere in the West, yeah.
Right. And I mean, the real story was horrific, but he was touching on that with the boot.
He definitely was. He was touching on that with the boot. He was touching on that when
Big Jim,
when Big Jim is hallucinating and wants to eat him because he sees him as a chicken. So that touches on it.
Right.
Cannibalism.
Now, this film is a period piece when you think about it.
Right. You're correct. And the thing is, there's actually a photo still of Georgia and the Tramp, and she's in more of the period close of the 1890s, which actually that's the history of the gold rush in the 1890s. The rest of it is kind of like you don't see period pieces.
Georgia is dressed in modern day traditional 1920s garb.
Right.
So it's kind of a hybrid between the two. It's like a period piece, but it also kind of takes place in the 20s, in the year that it was made.
Right, correct.
You can tell with her hair, especially. It's cropped short, a bob.
Right, correct.
And her party dress is very typical of the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Very glamorous, and revealing in a way.
Oh, yeah, definitely. She was supposed to play a prostitute, I mean, at the actuality of it. And yeah, obviously there was prostitutes in the real Gold Rush, but they were dressed more like, covered up and what have you.
Can you think of any earlier examples of Charlie doing something that didn't take place in the current time period he was recording it in? Obviously, his prehistoric past.
I was about to say that.
Yeah.
I can't think of any.
Yeah,
besides that.
Everything since I can't even think of any. Well, outside of like Limelight, that's obviously.
And that's strange too. In the Limelight, Neville went to war, and for some reason, I got the feeling, and it was World War One.
I think it was.
Yeah, because I think the movie took place in 1914.
Yes,
but they didn't. Right, but they didn't dress like 1914.
No. Because they had to uphold a certain style so that 1950s audiences would relate. And just like 1920s styles related to the Gold Rush with Georgia Hale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting that this is really the only... I mean, Limelight's well known, but as far as his Tramp comedies, this is really the only period piece that he ever did, where he actually played the Tramp, but in a different time period than the era that the film was being made in.
Right, correct.
Yeah.
But he is still the Tramp, there's really no difference. It's not like he changed his character at all to fit that particular era. He's just, he's like a time traveler. They just picked him up out of the 20s and just dropped him back into the 1880s.
In the first portion of The Great Dictator, it takes place in 1914. If you
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just like a small example.
Well, it's funny. It is a tramp, but a lot of people have said the tramp of the 1914 is so different than the tramp in the Gold Rush. He was
Yeah.
much more docile.
Yeah.
Can you imagine Keystone Charlie putting up with a lot of that stuff that was heaped on him?
He would have been the Black Larson.
Yeah.
But that's what you love about Chaplin, though, is the evolution. It's like Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse
Right.
kind of started in the same way as Chaplin. Um,
Right.
but what's funny is when I was watching the new Jurassic Park movie,
Yeah.
in the first Jurassic Park, the T-Rex is a bad guy. Well, not a bad guy, but the dangerous one.
Right.
And now, he's become such a fan favorite that in this new one, he's like the hero of the story.
Yeah.
They made him into the hero to fight the bad dinosaur. So I feel like it's like over time, these characters become endearing to people and they kind of soften them because they want to make them more relatable.
Oh, definitely. I don't think Keystone Charlie, if had he kept with that, it would have had a relatively short shelf life. People
Hmm
would have
Yeah.
been like, enough already. How many bricks can you throw?
But I feel like the tramp in the new janitor could be the Gold Rush tramp.
Oh yeah, you're right.
That evolution started pretty early.
Right.
He figured out real early that he couldn't just be Ford Sterling forever before people would get
Right.
tired of it. But before we jump into the Gold Rush full throttle, I want to take a minute to play some of the audio clips that we got. Obviously, the last episode we did was with Jason Allen, and that was fantastic.
Oh, it was wonderful. Learned so
Mhm.
much.
Love that one.
And thanks, Jason, because he spread that show all over, and we got a lot of new fans on the
Thank you,
Facebook
Jason.
page for that. So thank you very much, Jason, for doing that. And we can't wait to have you back anytime you want to come on. But the one before that one, we did an episode about the kid, and we had some really fun audio clips sent to us by some of the people who listened to the show with their own interesting perspectives on the story and personal stories of their own. And we'll go ahead and start playing those now.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is Michael Vogel, and it's a real pleasure to be taking part in the Modern Times podcast. The topic is personal stories and feelings about the kid. Well, I think I have a pretty unique story in that I saw the kid with Charlie Chaplin himself in attendance, as well as Una. It was April the 4th, 1972. And the Film Society at Lincoln Center had invited Charlie Chaplin to a salute in his honor at Philharmonic Hall, Lincoln Center, New York City. And it was a special occasion. It was a week or so before he was to get an honorary Academy Award, not far from his 83rd birthday. And, of course, the first time in the United States in 20 years. So it was quite an occasion. My brother Fran and I went to Manhattan from Long Island, hopped the train. We saw earlier in the day a matinee of City Lights, first time for me at the Lincoln Art Theater. Grabbed a bite, and then it was on to Philharmonic Hall, where tickets were $100, $25, and $10. We had the $10 cheap seats, which were almost in the back. The $100 tickets got you into a champagne reception after the films. They showed the Idol class, followed by the kid. But our seats were actually very good because Charlie came out on the side, Charlie and Una on a balcony on the side. The place went absolutely crazy. Standing ovations, people yelling and jumping up and down and screaming. And New York was aglow with Chaplin. There were posters of the Tramp in nearby stores and restaurants. The place was electric when Charlie and Una walked out, and he waved and smiled and held his hand over his heart. He pointed at his ring finger, and then Una, and then gave a little shrug, a little pantomime. So finally, what seemed maybe 5 minutes, the auditorium settled down, the lights went down, and the Idol class began. And again, the title card, the credits, the opening credits, just tremendous shouts and claps. It was nice that Edna, when her name came up, she got a nice round of applause. And when the camera pans down to the train, pulling into the station, and Charlie the Tramp pops out. Again, just people just screaming and yelling and clapping. And, of course, the kid, picture with a smile, perhaps a tear, was my first time seeing it. Charlie had just made some edits and made a new musical score to the film, which was wonderful. And it was just an absolute delight. For the first and only time with an audience, I heard people hissing the villain during the rooftop chase when they take Jackie away. I mean, people were crying, just laughing hysterically. It was just absolutely wonderful. And the lights came up, and it was even more of an applause. People just screaming, shouting, "Bravo, bravo," over and over. Again, Charlie waving. He looked like you could almost see tears in his eyes. I think he had a very special relationship with New York City, and he spent a lot of time in New York and walked the streets for hours in his vaudeville days and after he became famous in the films. And he gave a little speech. They had a microphone for him, thank goodness, and it was more extensive than the remarks he made at the Academy Awards. He said, paraphrasing, "Tonight is my renaissance. I'm being born again." And he said, "It's easy for you, but it's difficult for me as I'm very emotional, but it's nice to be among so many friends." Well, I can assure you that was a magical moment. And also during the films, I've looked to my left, I could see Charlie Chaplin, hand resting his chin with his glasses on, looking at himself on the screen from 50 years earlier. It was just incredible, a magical moment. I just wanted to share that, and that's my experience of seeing The Kid with a live audience. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Carrie Pomeroy, and I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I first learned the story behind The Kid, Chaplin's heartbreaking childhood separations from his family and the loss of his own son, Norman, from the Chaplin Today documentary on the MK2 DVD of The Kid. When I learned that story, I wondered how on earth Chaplin had made a movie like The Kid so soon after the death of his own son. And that launched me on a years-long quest to find out as much as I could about Chaplin and eventually to visit some of the important sites in his life, like his old studio in Hollywood, though I just stood around starry-eyed on the sidewalk and couldn't actually go in. On that same visit to Los Angeles, my son and daughter, my niece and I went to Inglewood Cemetery to find the Little Mouse's, Norman Chaplin's, grave. I knew the location, but it took some searching to find it. My kids were teasing me while we looked. "You're going to cry, Mom. You know you're going to cry." I said, "I really don't think I'm going to cry. After all, I didn't really know these people." Finally, with help from a cemetery worker who had a map of the graves, we found the simple headstone engraved only with the words, "The Little Mouse." "Whew, there it is," I said, and of course I burst into tears. Being there brought it all home to me that Chaplin was a real person who suffered real losses and then turned his losses into art that still touches people's lives today.
Thank you so much for those audio clips, and I'm sure we'll do the same thing for this episode. If you'd like to send us your review of The Gold Rush or any personal stories you have about the film, that's what this show is all about. You know, we strive to really get a group interaction on these shows and have people who don't normally have their voices heard about these films an opportunity and a venue to send us a clip or send us, you know, your personal story about the film, and we'll definitely share it on the show.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we're going to jump right in now talking about The Gold Rush. This
Yeah.
is, you know, by far the most, well, I don't know
And
if it's now the most famous Chaplin film, but it's definitely one of the most.
Yeah.
now that it's been restored, it's actually, and they've had so many orchestral screenings and actually just showing it across the country, I think people are noticing it more.
Well, it is definitely the best version, the one that they just released via Criterion
Oh,
Collection.
you
It
know,
is the
yeah.
best version of the film that's ever been available because it's the best of both worlds. It's the 1925 original version
Mm-hmm.
with the 1942 soundtrack that Chaplin conducted,
Oh, yes.
but without
Yes.
his narration over it. So it's
Right.
the perfect
Y-
blend.
You know, it's funny. The other day, I actually watched the Gold Rush on some obscure cable channel, and they had taken a public domain print. It was in deplorable condition, and they had like organ music attached to it. And I was like, I actually emailed them, and I was like, if you can't show Chaplin pristine, please don't show him. It was a deplorable condition.
I got a budget DVD one time that had the 1942 version of the film with no intertitles, but
Hmm.
they didn't have the music or the narration. They just had public domain music playing over the 1942 version. So you have
Oh,
no narration and no title cards. So it's like they just took that version and just said, "Well, we can't have the audio on it because that's
Right,
copyrighted. So we'll just strip the
right.
audio and just play public domain music over it." So it was the most confusing version that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I can imagine. The organ music's horrible.
Can you imagine somebody trying to get into Chaplin and picking up one of those dollar DVDs?
That's why I emailed them. I'm like, please don't. It's horrible.
Well, too though, if you want to do your own score to the film, the 1925 version, that's cool, but just make sure it's something decent. It's.
Right.
the score is everything.
Mhm.
Without it, like you lose all feeling and all meaning with the movie.
Oh yeah, you're right.
For
There have
instance,
been a lot of versions of the Gold Rush that I've seen with their own soundtracks from the 20s edition. And like I said, I think this film is easier to watch with different soundtracks than something like The Kid.
yeah,
Oh
the
yeah.
can't watch it without Chaplin's score. It's not the same to me. Just like I can't watch City Lights without Chaplin's score.
And it's funny though because for instance, the circus, when that film first came out, Charlie used to actually have his people go around to big movie theaters and suggest music to play with his films. And at the end of the circus, he wanted Irving Berlin's Blue Skies, but it was like a much slower paced one. And
What?
yeah, and one time I actually muted the circus and put, Irving Berlin's song, and it gave it an entirely different feel because the music at the end of the circus is just fantastic.
Hmm.
Oh
But
yeah.
That's interesting. I never knew that before.
yeah, so,
Um,
so when he reissued it, he did the new soundtrack, and that's the one that we're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
well, let's jump into the Gold Rush here and talk about the origins of the idea. Um, Obviously, at this point, Charlie had done A Woman of Paris in
Yes.
1923, which was a non-Chaplin, non-Tramp film. It was his stab at trying to do a drama with Edna
Hmm.
Purviance,
Right,
and as critically acclaimed as it was, it flopped because people wanted to see the Tramp.
Yeah.
right,
They expected a Chaplin film, and
right.
then that was the wrong rhetoric.
And his United Artists partners were getting a little impatient because they had gotten together in 1919, and he still had his first national contract,
Yeah.
which he finally completed. So The Woman of Paris was the first United Artists feature, and it it was critically acclaimed, but it wasn't, the public. So they
Yeah.
were a little disappointed. So I think he really was focusing on making a fantastic film so
Yeah.
that, his partners will also be satisfied. And I believe it was the seventh most profitable film in the silent era. So,
Yeah. It was one of the most popular films of
mhm.
25 for sure.
Oh, correct.
And I
1925 was a big year for movies.
yeah, it
The
was.
Lost World film came out. The Gold Rush. Didn't that film Greed come out in 1925 as well?
I
I
believe
believe
it
so.
did. Yeah.
So people always talk about 1939 being the most important year for movies, but
Hmm.
1925, as far as silence were concerned, you had the Phantom of the Opera too.
Hmm.
So
And what about Buster Keaton's The General?
that's right.
Yes.
I believe it came out in 1925. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
But this was just kind of the apex of the silent film era, and just to
Right.
think a couple years later that that would be all gone within a few months of the Jazz Singer coming out.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people were upset, a lot of filmmakers, not just because the talkie revolution, but because the silent film had kind of reached an apex of creativity,
Mm-hmm.
and they were really starting to make great films in this medium, and then that just got all turned on its head because everybody wanted sound, and so you kind of went back to the old clunky cameras that you couldn't move and you couldn't really do a whole lot with.
And
Yeah.
people had to stay static because like there was a microphone in the coffee table, so they had to stand near the coffee table. And
Hmm.
also when they started talkies, it cut off the rest of the world until they were
Yeah.
able to dub it. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, really one of the things that got Chaplin upset because if nothing else, he was a businessman, and he wanted his movies to make the most amount of money.
Hmm.
So
But with
I know that Harold Lloyd did a couple films where he did a silent version and a talking version simultaneously, and
his
I mean,
film The Freshman came out in 1925.
oh, that's right, yeah. So all three of those greats, Chaplin, Keaton, and Harold Lloyd, they were
Correct.
all making their, arguably their most popular films during this time period.
Yep.
So Charlie really had to step it up. I mean, not to say he wasn't stepping it up, but he had kind of let everybody down, from a critical point of view, with A Woman of Paris. And this is the first time people had really seen the Tramp since, what, The Pilgrim?
Right. Right.
1922, 1923. Yeah.
Yes.
So
And
that,
oh, another film, and I believe it was his brother's most popular, was Charlie's Aunt, where he is dressed up as a woman.
Mm.
And there's a picture of Charlie and Sydney dressed in their costumes. That came out in 1925, and that was one of his, greatest films, Sidney Chaplin.
did Charlie ever feel like Sidney was trying to steal some of his thunder as far as being in films, or did he not even consider him competition?
No,
I
I
don't think
don't.
he considered him competition at all.
No,
Because
no,
just
and
using that Chaplin name, of course, all that legal stuff he went through with the fake Chaplin people. Here
right,
comes another comedian with the last name Chaplin. You know,
and I think that, for instance, as far as the name, I think when Mildred Harris and he got divorced, that was one of his things that she could no longer use that name,
Yeah.
Chaplin.
didn't stop Lita Gray.
Oh no, no, no!
Uh,
She profited immensely.
Hmm.
mm,
Even though she got married three more times, she continued to be referred to as Lita Gray Chaplin.
it's exploiting the name. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So, A Woman of Paris is released, and the critics love it, but it flops. So
Mhm.
Chaplin needs to bring back the Tramp, and
Yeah.
so he
This,
starts working on the film. And
but
tell us about the real world situations that led to Chaplin's inspiration for this film.
the inspiration, I believe, came. He was visiting his friend Douglas Fairbanks, one of his best friends, and Douglas's wife, Mary Pickford, and they had some photographic stills or prints of the Klondike Gold Rush, the big march up the hill of the mountain,
Mm-hmm.
and he and there might have been some film clips of it, but that he saw. But I think that's what made him decide to do a film about the Klondike Gold Rush.
And I think that was in November 1923.
Yes, something like that.
Right.
And
When did
he
the
got
gold rush
started
happen?
right away.
When did the real gold rush happen? 1880s?
1890s.
1890s, okay. So
I
it
wrote,
really wasn't that long ago when you think about it. It was only
yeah,
about 20 something years,
Right.
20, 30 years,
20,
yeah.
30 years. Yeah, so when we think of that as being so long ago, but at that time, if he were to make something like this now, he'd be making it about a story of something that happened in the 1980s.
Yep.
Right.
So
And
it's not really all that crazy to think about.
Sid Grauman actually worked up in the Klondike in the 1890s, and that's why he was kind of an advisor for Charlie because he had actually worked up there, not as a person getting gold. I think he and his father had like a general store or whatever.
Regarding that, also the Donner Party, right?
Mm-hmm.
God,
Yes.
horrible. Yep. They were moving west, and they heard about a detour through that would like a shortcut, and so they went through the mountains, and it was way worse. They should have just kept on trail,
Mm-hmm.
and they were stuck and ran out of food. They ate their pack meals, their pack animals first.
Mm-hmm.
Then they had to decide who to eat.
And they also ate, the roof had some kind of substance, and they actually boiled that. Maybe it was made of cowhide or whatever.
Like
yeah.
But I know one of the Donner Party's rules was when they were divvying up each other, that they made sure no one ate each other's their own families.
And they had to be dead.
Yeah, had to be. They didn't like go straight ahead and kill them.
Yeah.
Ooh, yikes!
Yeah.
You can only imagine being in that situation where you had to make those kind of choices.
You had
Right.
no eat or be eaten.
So
Yeah.
here's an example of Charlie taking something like that and turning it into a comedy film.
Yes.
You know.
Correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
And it's such a dark, like, it was so twisted, but he makes it work. And if he had gone too far, it would have been crossing a line. But he definitely pushed the envelope with the with first eating his boot with Big Jim, and then like it's just so horrendous that they have consider eating each other. Well, Big Jim considers eating Tramp or the dog that's just there.
yeah.
Right.
Black Larson is of no help.
Right.
They send him on his merry way to find food, but he never comes back.
Right.
So, but I love the boot eating scene. I think it's so genius and original. The boot itself was made of licorice,
Mm-hmm.
and I love how meticulous it is because like it's being eaten like shellfish or something, or like a lobster, or
Right.
spaghetti with the shoestrings. Oh, it's brilliant. And
They got sick. They got sick recording that too.
They might have been admitted to a hospital. I can't remember, but they couldn't come into work the next day because it was just they were eating straight candy.
Right.
Like that's so bad for you.
Yeah.
But so funny. It looked like leather too.
Yeah, it definitely did.
Of course, with Charlie and the amount of takes that he would do, they probably ingested, more licorice than a human probably should.
And
Actually,
I have no idea how much they ate.
Actually, I believe that oh no, you know what? We're talking about food. I'm thinking of the breadsticks. You're
Oh, the bread roll
yeah,
scene.
but
That's a great scene too.
oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Well,
And
to be fair though, Fatty Arbuckle did do that dinner
Now,
roll thing first.
You know what? No, it was in vaudeville.
Okay.
Because I found a clip, and there was somebody in vaudeville that was a little upset about the boot. But yes, on screen, Roscoe Arbuckle did do it. I think in 1918.
Something
17.
like that. And there's a home video of Chaplin doing it years before as well, I think. And I guess practicing for when he's going to do it in the Gold Rush. And that's why I like the Chaplin score with that scene specifically.
Yes.
Because it just sounds correct. It's like a hurdy-gurdy type of song. Just silly, but still light and comedic. And it works well with Dancing with Rolls.
And the lighting that he used on his face, it gave it like an ethereal look. I mean,
Yeah, it
it
was
was
like a
just,
spotlight.
yes, it was gorgeous. It's like one of the greatest things put to film. It's just cinematically just gorgeous, beautiful.
Yeah, the new great movie ride at Walt Disney World. They have a little film they show at the end of the ride, and they've updated the film they show at the end, and they have Chaplin doing the dinner roll dance
Oh,
as
wow.
as the first thing that they show in the montage. They used to have shots from The Rink and The Cure, a lot of the Mutual films, and you
Hmm.
can find that on YouTube. And that's the one they had for like the last 25 years. But they just re-updated the film, and now because of course it's hosted by Robert Osborne now, the whole ride.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, wow.
But the whole
And
thing's on YouTube. It's cool to check out because Charlie
what is
always opens the whole montage at the end.
what is it again? It's Disney, the
Yeah,
Disney
it's
ride.
Disney. Yeah, it's just Disney the Great Movie Ride because they have it
Yeah.
set
Oh,
up in
okay.
Orlando. It looks like Grauman's Chinese Theater
Oh,
outside.
wow.
Oh,
Oh
wow.
yeah, if you've never been on that, that's a fun
Oh,
ride.
wow.
Yeah, that's great. But Charlie took a lot of real world um, horrific things from the gold rush of the 1890s and decided to make a comedy film about them. Now, when he started filming, he initially wanted to record the film in the wild, right? If you look at that opening shot from the film, Lita, Gray, and Charlie themselves play extras because they
Oh,
got
yeah.
as many people as they could to fill out that scene of that long shot of the people walking up the mountain.
Right.
They needed as many extras as they could, so Charlie and Lita even used themselves.
Right. And actually in the silent version, right before they go up the mountain, there is a scene. It's now included a scene where they're walking in the snow, lines and lines of people. He cut that out in the 1942 and just went right to the up the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good that both those versions are easily available now. You
Oh,
can have the
yes.
choice to see, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The differences
Hmm.
between those two versions. But so he starts filming this, and what was it? About 2 days in, he realized that there was no way to
No,
make this film
a
in the great
month.
outdoors.
No, I'm sorry. He was up in the mountains,
You
April.
were right. You were right, by the way. It was in the snow country of Sierra,
Um,
Nevada.
it was all of the month of April,
Mm-hmm.
1924,
Up the
and
Chilkoot Pass. I knew that.
right. And I think that one of the things was the snow. There's pictures of him up there, and the snow appeared to be melting under his feet.
Hmm.
Because he, was taking forever.
But the great outdoors doesn't sound like a place where Chaplin's directing methods would be accepted.
Oh yes, you're right. You're right, because he didn't have control.
Yeah.
Nope.
So, how much of the film is actually in the wild?
The Klondike. I mean, not the Klondike. The
Chil-
mountain.
yeah, the Chilkoot Pass.
And I believe there's another scene when we first meet him. I mean, he's not up on the mountain, a real mountain, but when he slides down, you know how he slides down and he sticks his cane
Yeah.
in the snow. I believe that is a piece of footage
Yeah.
from up in the Sierra.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I
I
mean,
believe that's right too.
they cut that in with the studio footage pretty well then, because it really is kind of hard to tell. They did a good job of combining
Hmm.
those different spots.
Oh yeah, they did phenomenally. Like the cabin looks real, even though it
Yeah.
was probably, like when it's up on the mountain, it looks like a real cabin, not a little, I guess, uh, tiny little toy cabin or whatever.
So when Charlie starts doing this film, initially he cast his wife Lita Gray
Hmm.
as the
Yeah.
lead,
Yeah.
and of course many would know her as the angel in the Gold Rush.
No,
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
she was
sorry, I'm
so
sorry,
bad.
Angel and the Kid.
Chaplin and her had a relationship. and he got her pregnant.
Hmm.
And this time it was real. And I guess he thought he had no choice, so
He didn't.
he married her.
And not that it makes a huge difference, but it kind of does to me. She wasn't 15. She was
No,
actually 16. Her and
she was
Charlie, her and Charlie have their birthdays are one day apart. So
funny.
she turned 16 up in the mountains, and their tryst started actually at his home after, he went back. So she was 16. It's been, I think Lita actually said she was 15, but if you read the book, her book, I mean, the chronologically, it was 16, even though she said it was 15.
Well, there's a lot of things in that book that are 100% accurate, so
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a steamy book.
just getting an age off by 1 year doesn't seem that big of a deal compared to a lot of the other stuff in there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
he casts her as the lead. Now, are there any photos or footage of Lita as the dance hall girl before he
There,
decided to scrap it?
there's a photo of no footage. There's a photo. What happens is the tramp is dreaming, and in his dream, she appears holding a cake. There's no footage, but actually, if you Google, you could probably pull it up. She's standing there with. She's not dressed as a dance hall girl, but she appears with a cake, and he's dreaming, and that obviously had to be cut out.
So, how far into production of the film did she lay this bombshell on Charlie that she was pregnant?
Probably would have been early on.
I believe if you do the math, he was born in May, so it was probably September. If you go back 9 months, so it was September that she let him know that she was pregnant. No, she got pregnant in September, and back then women had to wait like a couple of months to actually be sure, or a month. So it was probably October when she found out, and
Now,
then
what would have happened if he was halfway through the filming of it and then she laid this all out? If he was halfway through, he'd be stuck.
he probably may have diminished the dance hall girl part, or he
Hmm.
may have restarted it. Who
Yeah.
knows? Yeah.
It reminds me of when he wanted to redo City Lights with Georgia Hale
Yeah.
at the last
Right.
minute,
Right.
because
Hmm.
that kind of thing wasn't beyond him. He would be perfectly fine with redoing it if he thought he had to.
Yeah.
Right.
So now, where did
Oh,
of course Lita Gray isn't in the film. She was let go because of the
Mhm.
pregnancy.
yep.
Um, and another actress was brought in by the name of Georgia Hale. Now,
Yes.
where did Chaplin discover her?
Um, Joseph von Sternberg,
Right.
who actually is really famous for creating Marlene Dietrich. He had a film, I believe it was called Salvation Hunters, and she appears in it. And he had seen it, and he was drawn to her character, drawn to her. And I believe that was in Salvation Hunters, I believe, was in 1923, and he had seen it, and he was drawn to her, and she said she was 19 when it was made, but she was actually 25.
that's
Oh my god.
that's quite a difference.
Right? Yeah.
Why did everybody want to be 19 at that time, or under 20 during all these
Oh,
films?
Women
you
have a short shelf life in Hollywood.
like Edna, she looked like very youthful at 19, but as soon as she turned like 24, 25, she looked matronly all of a sudden.
Correct.
Well, her
And it might have just been time.
yeah, and
I don't know.
stress. I mean, working with Chaplin had to be stressful.
Probably.
I mean,
Right.
you were paid very well, but I can't imagine it always being that easy, especially if you're Edna and you're having I don't know, whatever they had, but they had a relationship at some point.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and I believe that even after they broke up, I believe when he had periods of depression, or just periods where he was down, I'm sure he turned to her. They were friends.
I'm
The thing,
surprised that he didn't find a spot for her in the Gold Rush. Not obviously as the dance hall girl at this point, but as someone in the film, even in a bartender or another waitress in the film or something, because he kept her on the payroll for so long until she passed away. But
right.
Charlie was very loyal in those ways. He would.
Oh yes.
But I wonder if maybe Edna was just out doing her own thing at this time. She was kind of over the whole making movies.
The
Oh no.
sequel, right?
Yeah,
What?
correct. And it was around this time.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
the Seagull, yes.
That was a.
And Joseph von Sternberg directed that.
Maybe that's how.
I've never seen that film, actually. I'd be interested in seeing that.
It's lost.
Oh, well, no
Not
wonder.
lost. It was burned in 1933 for tax purposes. It was actually burned in front of IRS agents. Charlie looked at it and said no. On screen, but Linda Wada, who is a big Edna Purviance historian, she actually was visiting relatives of Edna's in Nevada, and they discovered a box, and she was looking through it, and it was photo stills from the Seagull, and she has a book, I believe it's called The Seagulls, that has photo stills of that movie.
That's interesting. It's these things still turn up, 100 years later. It's amazing. Recently, someone just posted something on Facebook about they found a bunch of 35 millimeter silent film reels in like a garbage in like the dump or something, and they took them home, and a lot of them were decomposed, and they just took screenshots of each reel and put it on Facebook and said, "What are these movies?" And some of them had been already discovered. But the quality of them were much better than what they had originally had. So this stuff's out there. I feel as the years go by, more and more this stuff will pop up. It's just now a race against the clock because of the fragile way those films were
Right.
made. The film stock
Right.
can decompose, and every year that goes by is less and less and less likely that I'm actually surprised they still exist. They haven't decomposed completely, because unless you keep it in a refrigerated, sealed up vault,
But that's where Chaplin was really ahead of his time, actually, because he had his own laboratory. So all of his films from 1918 are really preserved because he had the foresight. The ones before that, a lot of times people would discover the reel and it would actually be dust. And that
God.
stuff was highly flammable.
Oh yeah.
Yes, highly flammable.
Now, you mentioned something interesting there, that Charlie had the foresight to lock these films away. Now, in the teens and 20s, a lot of directors didn't think on those terms. A lot of studios didn't think in those terms of holding on to these films for future use. A movie came out,
They didn't know.
it made its
They didn't
money,
know.
and they'd throw it in a vault and let it deteriorate and fall apart. Because there was no DVD, there was no television, I don't think they had ever even thought about re-releasing films at that time.
Right.
I don't think they even knew about stuff like that. Maybe
That's
like the popular films, but not like that.
It's kind of like early television. They would videotape them or, film them and then tape over them, especially like the live shows. So again, people probably didn't have the foresight to think, you know what? These might be shown again. And actually, Desi Arnaz with his 3 cameras, he's another one who had the foresight to film I Love Lucy like that, and
It took it out of the stage play. If you watch like The Honeymooners, the way that's filmed, it's filmed with one camera angle, one camera. It looks like you're watching a play. What was it?
Correct.
I Love Lucy was like the
I
first.
Love Lucy was the first to use the 3 camera system. It's kind of using like D.W. Griffith's method of like the close up and stuff like that. There's the close up shot, the medium shot, like torso and face, and then the full length shot.
They could also film different scenes at the same time, because they could have
Right.
they could be shooting a scene with Desi and Lucy, and then the next room over they could be shooting a scene with their neighbors simultaneously, so they could get the episodes done a lot faster than they used to.
Yeah, and that's a technique dating back as early as the 1890s, early 1900s, used by, I can't remember his name, but he was a director under Thomas Edison's film company.
Yeah, but Charlie had the foresight to hang on to these films. Now, do you think he knew that, 100 years from now people will be going back to these films, or did he just think of them as an asset that he needed to hang on to?
Well, he could use them for profit.
Yeah, and
Maybe he did.
well,
And also he owned his own films too, so he didn't have to worry about a studio shoving it in their vault and not taking care of it properly.
I like to hope that he kept them for sentimental value, but maybe that's not the case.
The thing is, though, his films from the beginning, as soon as he made it, were constantly reissued. So maybe that, played into it, but.
Or like just in case reasons.
Right.
Because he turned the Gold Rush, he reissued that in 1942 with very new stuff, narration, music, cut like slashing the film.
Right. Yeah.
So he had ideas for his films long after they were made and released.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But going back to the Gold Rush, so Georgia Hale is brought on to be the dance hall girl, and they go back into the studio to start making the film, because obviously working in the outdoors just wasn't going to cut it,
Right.
for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So let's get into a little bit of the making of the film. Whoever wants to start that off, wherever you'd like to start. There's a lot of stories.
There's a lot. Well, Chaplin brought back Max Swain.
Oh, that's right.
With him in Keystone, I believe.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. And a lot of his Keystones.
Yeah, lots of his Keystones. So he brought him back to play Big Jim. And I think Max Swain was terrific. He was good at being like neurotic, if that's a word I want to use.
You know what? But Eric Campbell, had he lived, you try to imagine the films that they could have made together.
He would have been a great Max Swain or Black Larson.
Correct. Yeah, because he had that menacing thing.
Yeah,
where
he did.
Max Swain got frustrated at him, but he wasn't quite as intimidating. But yeah, that was, Charlie bringing him back from his Keystone days.
Yeah.
Wasn't Max Swain in The Pilgrim too?
Charlie started using him in the Idol class.
That's right. So pretty much he kind of took over the Eric Campbell roles in the Chaplin films after Eric Campbell passed away. Now, Eric Campbell, for those who didn't know, was pretty much the bad guy in every Chaplin Mutual film that he made in 1916, 1917.
Eric Campbell's car accident, was it?
Right. He was drunk, unfortunately.
Yeah. And he passed away. What, in 1917, 18 did he die?
After the adventure, a couple of months after the adventure and before he started shooting, his first national, A Dog's Life.
Mm-hmm. Did he have a role for Eric Campbell set up in A Dog's Life, or did he pass away before he even started working on that film?
Yeah, he passed away before that, but he definitely was going to be part of the stock company.
Mm-hmm. As he should have been. He was great.
I think Charlie was always looking for an Eric Campbell, and he never quite got the same chemistry. Although Max Swain did phenomenal in this. He really, really did.
So, we're talking about the making of the film. There's just so many stories, not only in front of the camera, but behind the scenes. Though Chaplin was going through that whole pregnancy thing and the shotgun marriage and all that kind of stuff. This is when he started to really go gray, too. And he went gray almost overnight.
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
And it probably started with Lita. That's my prediction.
He shut down production as soon as he found out she was pregnant. And I don't believe he started again until January because, you know, he had to get married and he had to find the leading lady. And so he started in January 1925 again.
So the film features quite a few interesting scenes. Sarah, why don't you tell us about one of your favorite ones?
Well, one of the stories about the origins of the chicken costume is that it was going to be played by just one of the workers on the film was just going to be put in the costume. The problem with that was he couldn't portray himself as the tramp, as the chicken. So the idea, I think it was Chaplin's assistant director who said, "Why don't you get in it?" And like that just seemed like a no-brainer. And so they put Chaplin in the chicken costume instead. And there's lots of photographs of Chaplin wearing the costume.
He got frustrated because he was directing this guy who was in this chicken costume, and he says, "No, that's not right. You know, that's not how a chicken would act." So he just eventually realized what he does with everything else. I'll just do it myself.
It's the tramp as a chicken. That's what it is. And it works because he's mixing the two very well. That just some regular worker, he doesn't have the proper training to do that.
Yeah.
So that was a complete waste if they had kept that.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's actually footage of him doing that up in the Klondike. I mean, up in Northern California. If you watch Unknown Chaplin, the chicken scene, or was much more like actually they went out of the cabin and they were running across the snow. But unfortunately, he cut that because that was filmed up in the mountains.
And of course, this is the scene that is imagined in the Robert Downey Jr. Chaplin film.
Yeah.
He's talking to Lita. When he's talking about Lita, his marriage, they cut it to a scene of him in the chicken costume talking to Lita on the set of The Gold Rush in the cabin. And that to me is one of the most frustrating things I've ever seen in a movie because they show it for about 7 seconds and they cut away and they never talk about The Gold Rush again. And
and they even showed Robert Downey Jr. like doing some of the motions with the tilting of the cabin, and that's the end of it. It's like 10 seconds long.
You went to all the trouble to build this set, to build this chicken costume, and it looks fantastic. It looks perfect. And then they only show it for 10 seconds. And it's like, all right, well, now back to more drama about Charlie and his relationships. That's why, I cannot stress it enough. And now that Richard Attenborough is gone, I don't think it's probably going to happen. But a director's cut of Chaplin, give us the 3-hour, 4-hour version that you were working on that got cut down. Where is all that footage?
Remember when we were with Dan Kamen and he was talking about all the footage that they had shot of Charlie and Edna?
Yeah.
It was like a montage, and like 3-minute montage, and Attenborough cut
What's 3 minutes? It would have worked so well.
Right, yeah.
I always thought there'd be an extended version of that because when the movie was put out on Blu-ray in what I think 2009 or 2008, it was the 15th anniversary edition. And I thought, oh, great, they're going to put the footage back in. Nope.
Right. He shot 4 hours and had to reduce it to 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah. That's such an iconic scene, and you're talking about the chicken scene, then you're talking about the dance of the dinner rolls, and the scene where he thinks that Black Larson ate his dog. That's a really, really good Chaplin-esque moment.
Yeah.
And it lends it to your imagination. You kind of put the pieces together in your head what's going on without actually them having to show you anything. And then it turns out that, he was wrong. He didn't actually eat the dog. But it's that hesitation. That hesitation, like, oh my God, is that what's going to happen here type thing.
But actually, what happened to that dog? Last he was seen was with Black Larson.
Oh yeah,
I always wonder, like, whatever happened to that cute little puppy dog?
I forgot about that.
Yeah,
Well, it was trying times, so
right.
I'd rather have to eat a pet dog than another human, though. If I had to really,
Yeah, that's true.
I guess there were worse things that were going on at that time. So when did Charlie wrap production of the film?
In April of 1925, actually, I believe the final scene, he shot on a boat. I believe it was called the Lark, and it went from like San Diego, I believe, to San Francisco, and that's where he filmed the final scenes, and that was in, I believe, April, 1925.
This is a film where you really, really feel bad for the tramp.
Oh my God!
You know,
When
his isolation from the rest of humanity is not only
oh
it's not only shown on the screen, but it's just amplified because the people around him take advantage of him and make fun of him and all this stuff.
Oh yeah,
oh
throughout the whole movie. Oh my god.
when
Uh,
they stand him up and he's at that door, oh my God, you know, where the dance hall girls were supposed to come to New Year's Eve dinner,
oh,
and oh,
the look on his face is just heartbreaking.
and the way that he did it, you can actually see like his throat, like he was choking back tears, and he looked broken, and we're,
Definitely.
we're not used to seeing him like that.
Mm.
He probably was thinking about Lita Gray.
But the thing about that, because going with the narrative of the film, he had worked so hard to make that such a special night. He had shoveled snow
hmm
off of the sidewalk. And the best part is he shoveled it onto like the next building's
Right.
lot
Well, that's the
to make
Chaplin
more money.
twist. You know, that's the Chaplin
Chaplin's
twist to that whole thing. He's doing that, but he ended up, having to keep moving the pile of snow down each
yeah,
house.
Until
until I got to a jailhouse, and then
right.
I'll just leave it there
Yeah,
then.
and he ran
Uh,
away.
no, go ahead.
This is a further step from the kid into the gold rush, and then on to into the City Lights Chaplin era, where he kind of comes into a full sympathetic character.
Oh yeah,
Oh
and
yes.
the kid and the gold rush have very like typically happy endings, if you want to call them that. Like it ends on a good note in each of those films, but after like post Gold Rush, it's much like more sympathetic and sentimental,
Right.
and you don't know what the future holds. Like the circus, he's walking off into the distance. Of course, city lights, that holding the flower up to his face and seeing the blind girl, and that same pattern of just like in the end everything will be okay, but you don't
Right.
know what'll happen to the tramp. And but in the Gold Rush, because there's two releases, 1925, 1942, it ends on a good note, but
hmm
in different ways. Like he's gonna be with the girl.
Right. And he's a millionaire.
He is a millionaire.
Right.
It's like a very happy, like money and a girl, yes.
Right.
But the way he edits it in the end in 1942 is just you miss that whole like I didn't see that scene for a long time because I'd been watching the 1942 version.
Yeah,
Right.
and
Cut-
we'll get into that too because it makes the edits that he made in the 42 version, not even talking about the narration that he's doing, but the edits that he made makes the film feel completely, well, not completely different, but very different than the original. As far as he doesn't look in the 1942 re-edit, he doesn't look quite as pathetic as he
Correct.
did in the original film.
And
right.
and Georgia appears a little bit more sympathetic because, when she invited him to dinner in that scene, in the 1925 version, it's like she looks over at one of the girls and she winks like,
Yeah.
you know what, I'm gonna invite him to dinner, and you
Yeah,
know,
what does it matter?
right, right. But he cut that from the 1942 version.
Mm.
Did he think maybe that made the Tramp look too pathetic? That he
I think
decided
so.
against that?
I think so. I think he wanted to make him less pathetic and
Mhm.
Georgia maybe more empathetic. And then he changed that note. Like when she's writing a note after the night after she stood him up,
Yeah.
the note is actually for Jack, and she says, "I love you." But in the 42, when Charlie gets the note, it says, "I'm sorry what happened last night. Can we talk?"
They
So,
completely edited out the fact that that letter she was writing was meant to go to Jack and
she
not to
loved him.
Charlie. Yeah.
Right.
And Jack gives it to the waiter and says, "Give this to that homeless guy over there."
Right.
And so that makes it even more pathetic, the fact that he's going to go on this gold rush adventure now to find, Black Larson's gold, because now he thinks that Georgia likes him. So
Right.
now he's going to like prove himself to her, which in the 1942 version that looks legitimate, like that's what's going on. But in the 1925 original, it makes him even more pathetic because that note wasn't even meant for him.
Right.
Right.
And in the 1940, excuse me, in the 1925 version where she says, "I love you," and he thinks it's for him, and he runs up to her, and he's kissing her hand. Her body language, if she was like repulsed that he was, kissing her
He
hand.
looked more shocked to me than repulsed, but that's your opinion.
Right.
And I honestly didn't even notice that discrepancy. But that makes a lot of sense.
The thing is about Chaplin films, you can always find something you never noticed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
and since we're talking about the 1942 version, let's explain a little bit about what happened. So the film comes out in 1925, and
Hmm.
it's claimed as one of his masterpieces. Um,
Correct.
1942 rolls around, and Charlie
Hmm.
decides to reissue his most popular film
Hmm.
and his favorite film. But
Right.
obviously, 1942, there's sound movies and everything, and this is right after he did The Great Dictator.
Right.
So he says, well, let me go back to the Gold Rush. Let me re-edit it. Let me add my own narration to the film, and we'll put it back out for a modern audience. Um, now
The
there are some
interesting
pros and
thing,
cons to that concept. Go ahead, Anne.
the in, the interesting thing is somehow the 1925 version, the copyright, expired, and that's why the 1925 went into the public domain. Um, and when he re-edited the Gold Rush, the original wasn't copyrighted, and it expired, and that's why that one went out into the public domain.
mm,
The 1925 version, obviously without the soundtrack, is still a
Right.
public domain film,
Correct. Correct.
like a lot of films from 1925 are nowadays.
Right.
mm.
Right.
Um, so what was obviously when the Gold Rush came out in 1925, it was a big hit. When it came out in 1942, was it a big hit again with modern audiences?
Yes, I believe so. It was exalted, obviously not as much as the 1925, because 1942 people were still pro Chaplin. He hadn't gotten into getting tied up with communism and all that. So I think, and before Joan Barry, and
Okay. I was
yeah,
about to ask if that
right,
was one of the cases he released it, but obviously not.
right. So it was probably, you know, people received it well. That was probably the last time in the United States he was actually received, positively.
Now, what do you think of his narration of the film?
I personally don't mind it. I think it's a different take,
Hmm.
and I like how he narrated everyone's
Oh
dialogue.
yes. Hmm.
Like I think it works well. Like he didn't do it. He clearly thought out what he was going to do, and I personally think it worked.
It's
It's
clever and
Yeah,
it's
it is clever.
comedic. There's one of the best lines that I love is when Jack goes after Georgia in the dance hall. He wants to go into her dressing room, and here's Charlie, like real tiny next to him, and he's like, talking about himself. He goes, and there he was, a dauntless cavalier guarding her sanctuary. I love that. I love that line. It's just,
And he reads the dialogue like a children's story in a way. Like
That's what
right.
I was gonna say. I was gonna say it's like Charlie Chaplin sitting down with a book and reading a
Yes.
story to you.
Yeah.
It
He's
wasn't
creating
flat.
yeah. He's creating the characters with a certain, but he's not like making it comically like a girl's voice or like a menacing man. He's just changing the tone of his voice.
Mhm.
Right.
Very
Yeah.
slightly.
Yeah.
To make it like a different character.
And like when he sees Georgia, the way he says, and Georgia, you just know that, oh my God, he's so in love with her, by the way that he says her name.
Yeah.
Now, for years, the 1942 version, there's a lot of debate. A lot of people despise that version. They don't consider it the real version of the movie, which it's not. It's a re-edited. It's kind of like the Star Wars Special Edition. It's hated by a lot of Chaplin fans. But for the longest time, that was the only version that you could see that was officially
Right.
released by the Chaplin family.
Right.
And a lot of people found that frustrating. Now, recently, the Criterion version that was put out has both versions. You can watch the 42 re-edited, but the great thing or the original. But the great thing about that is both versions feature different, not different scenes, but different takes of a lot of the shots. So the 1942 version is its own beast, as in it's not the exact same shots as the
Right.
1925 version, because when he went back to edit that version, he used a different negative, which was shot from a slightly different angle.
Right. And the thing is that the Chaplin no longer owned the 1925 version when it went in the public domain. But especially now, modern audiences, before they restored the Gold Rush, most people like Turner Classics said, when they showed the Gold Rush, it was always in 1942. So that's the one that people were familiar with, because I noticed, like, on social media, sometimes people are like, what are you talking about with the Georgia kiss? And they were like confused. And now that it's been restored, it's in, people know that version. Unless you went on like the internet and you knew, like, you'd been a Chaplin fan and, you knew about the original one and you could try and pull it up. Most people only knew about the 1942 version.
Yeah. Something I want to mention too about the original version is the title cards. Whoever designed the title cards and the intertitles did some really fantastic artwork. When it introduces Georgia for the first time, it's got like the flower.
Yes.
It's like a paint. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a painting. Those are things
Right.
that got lost when, like I was talking about, the silent era was really reaching a pinnacle of creative artistry. They were even designing special title cards and intertitles with artwork and designs on them, which were very popular during this point. I mean, you go back to the Keystone and the Mutual era, there was nothing like that. It was just sorry.
Most people, when they think of silent movies, and that's how I used to feel, Chaplin he was sparingly used title cards, because a lot of silent movies, it's like you're trying to watch, the action, and then there's this long narrative of title card, so it's frustrating. Where he was short and sweet, and he used them sparingly, but of course his body, the way that he moved his body, conveyed a lot of stuff, and you didn't need, an explanation of what's going on.
Would you say that the Tramp in the Gold Rush is the most identifiable to the public? You have the dance of the dinner rolls. I mean, that's probably. Would you say that's the most famous Chaplin scene in any of his films?
Ooh, that's very debatable.
It's iconic for sure.
It's one of the
Um,
familiar scenes. I'll say that of his.
like Bart, The Simpsons, they had the grandpa was doing the dinner rolls, the dance of the dinner rolls. But it's definitely one of his most iconic scenes and one of the most iconic scenes in film history, in my
Yes.
opinion.
Even though Arbuckle in films did it first, it's funny that Charlie is almost credited now as being the person that did that.
Charlie made it his own. It wasn't just the movement, it was the lighting, and it's just, like I said, it's like got a magical quality. It's ethereal. He made that definitely his own. And even when he's out of costume and he's doing it, it's to me, it's a different feel.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily matter who did it first. Sometimes it does, but it's who made it iconic.
Well, I'm just trying to be fair too, because we're Chaplin fans, but we're also not going to ignore the fact that some aspects he did borrow from other places.
But
yeah.
But you know something? You don't necessarily know that because it was in vaudeville, and he could have seen that in vaudeville.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we weren't there. I'm
right.
just trying to let everyone know that we know some things did happen before Chaplin. We don't think that Chaplin invented every single thing.
Oh yeah,
at that time. He borrowed from others, and others borrowed from him, and it was a well that everybody kind of shared at that time.
Yeah, everyone's inspired and influenced by their predecessors. Like Michael Jackson, for instance, he was inspired by James Brown's dance moves, or
Fred Astaire.
Yeah, absolutely. And he turned it into his own. And he's considered one of the most famous, identifiable pop stars today.
Right.
It's like the Beatles' Twist and Shout. So many people think the Beatles wrote that. No, they didn't write it. The Isley Brothers wrote that song and had a hit with it a couple years prior. But the Beatles version is just so iconic that I would say 75% of the public probably think the Beatles recorded that first, that they wrote that song. And that just goes to show you how their twist on it, I don't want to say exceeded the original, but it took it to a different place then. So that I can almost compare to Arbuckle doing the dinner roll dance and then Charlie doing it a couple years later. Just completely took it to a different place.
Right.
Let's talk about for a second the special effects in the Gold Rush. There's obviously the man in the suit. So he had a real bear that he used in some shots.
Right.
And then he had a guy in a costume playing a bear.
Oh, Raleigh Totherell definitely has to be credited special effects and the chicken, the dissolve where you see him as a chicken and then he fades into a human. Fantastic. And the cabin teetering. That scene always gets me.
Oh, the cabin teetering, I think, is probably one of the most iconic things about the Gold Rush. Yeah. And the thing was, he basically recycled it from earlier films like The Immigrant, for example. Just the rocking back and forth, like
right.
How it's like a seesaw type,
right,
on one side and the other. But how Chaplin and Big Jim use the space is what makes it very special.
Right.
And I've seen the film dozens, hundreds of times, but that scene, my heart races.
Mine too, definitely, exactly. That's exactly
what happened, but it's just that suspense of like, oh my god, he's so close to falling, he's so close to dying. It's literally on the edge of a cliff.
Yeah.
And even when he finally gets out, if you look, he's like falling back, and I'm like, oh, poor Charlie. Can you imagine he got out and then he fell off the cliff because he lost his balance?
And what reminds me of, like, when they had the smaller model of the cabin shown on the cliff with the little figurines of Big Jim and the Tramp, which are like, they're little puppets, but they look just like them.
They do.
And what reminds me of that cabin is when the Wizard of Oz used something similar for the tornado and the house going up.
Right.
That's what that reminds me of.
When they were in the cabin and like they didn't realize that they got caught in this blizzard, and it's funny because they're in the cabin and you can see the cabin moving around and but then all of a sudden it shoots to the cabin on the cliff and you're like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Well, Charlie
And
just thinks he's drunk or something, right? He wakes up and he
Right.
just thinks his balance is all off because
Yeah.
he had too much
oh
to
yeah,
drink.
because the weight and the balance. I'm intrigued by the when they're sliding all over the place,
Right.
and they had to clearly like rock the cabin back and forth to make that look somewhat
Right.
realistic.
Right. Definitely.
We're talking about iconic scenes from the film. There's a scene in particular where Charlie realizes that those girls aren't coming to his New Year's Eve party.
Mhm.
He walks to the
Oh.
dance hall, and that shot of him looking into the dance hall from the outside. That
Right.
that should
Oh,
be the cover to every Chaplin book.
He was a broken man. I always say never was the tramp more lonely and alone. It was just, oh my God, it was terrible. Very sad.
But I mean that shot in particular is just the tramp is always on the outside looking in. He's
Right.
he's never accepted as a member of society. He's always going to be the outcast. He's always going to be on the outside. And
And
and that's the
you know,
brilliance of him because he was able to show that without any title cards or anything. You
right.
just understand what's going on by
Right.
the way he shoots that scene.
The scene where when he first gets into the dance hall and there's all these people and he's looking around and then all of a sudden everybody's on the dance floor and he's standing there alone, and the way that his back is positioned and his hand, and you can see even from his back how lonely he is, and it's like he's invisible. You know what I'm saying? Like nobody sees him. Like even a scene where Georgia looks past him, you
mhm.
know, which actually, in the original one, there is a scene where she stands and she looks around,
Oh
and
yeah.
he's looking back and forth. You can feel his heart pounding. But in the 1942, they cut that out. But in the original one, it was like he was invisible. She looked right past him.
Yeah, that's
Hmm.
also a scene. I cannot remember exactly the film that they used that in. I mean, I'm sure they used it in a lot more than just one film. There's a film made in color, probably the 80s or so, where they recreate that scene almost exactly. And I go, oh,
And you know
that's
what?
from the Gold Rush. I know where they got that from. Well, I don't know if that had been done before too, but
What's interesting is he actually had characters in that dance hall that were real people from the Gold Rush. That little guy that's doing the dance, his name was Daddy Long, I think, and he was close to 90 years old, and he had been in the actual Gold Rush.
Oh my God.
And the man, I didn't know this until I saw a picture. The guy where the tramp's looking at the picture, he's kind of embarrassed because the guy's staring at him. That man actually had a peg leg. Well, it was almost his leg had been cut off, and it almost looked like a crutch was attached to his leg. And you don't notice it actually when he's looking at the tramp, and but I actually saw a picture. It was in a magazine. I was like, oh my God, that guy had like a peg leg.
so Charlie was really going for accuracy by getting
Authenticity.
authenticity, going for I'm going to make this film, but I'm going to try to make it as authentic as possible with actual people from that time period if I can get them. And that's really cool. That adds an extra element to the film that probably a lot of people don't realize.
Right. And in Unknown Chaplin, when Georgia, when she got interviewed and she was talking about how Chaplin would come in all pissed off and he put his hands in his pocket, they cut to a picture of him in the Gold Rush and he looked so like pissed off. But actually, what he was doing is he was trying to show the people in the dance hall when they sing Auld Lang Syne how their faces are supposed to look, because Auld Lang Syne, you always think about the past, and a lot of them look sad. And that's actually what he was doing, but they actually used it in Unknown Chaplin to make it look like, he was walking around with that face. Although, he was said to be a tyrant sometimes,
Yeah.
uh, on the set.
And that is a good example because I remember Georgia Hale in an interview talking about the scene where they arrive at the cabin anyways to see the tramp, and
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna scare him with Jack
Mm-hmm.
coming in, and that scene they did, I don't know, like 100 times or something
Right.
like that, because Chaplin was trying to get a certain reaction from Georgia that he just couldn't say out. He couldn't direct himself. He just
Right.
wanted natural reaction. It after Jack kisses her, and she did it like so many times. She was getting sick of being kissed by Jack that she slaps him. That
Right.
wasn't in the script, and that's exactly what Chaplin wanted,
Right.
and kept it in the film, the very last take.
And Georgia Hale was one of the people that actually did a tell-all on Chaplin.
Yeah.
And she, to me, made it. She tried to make it seem like she was chased throughout their relationship. I mean, there was some insight into Charlie. In her book.
Yeah, that book I never read.
Yeah.
I do know, I'm aware of the horror stories regarding unknown Chaplin, and when they went to interview her, I just got that book. In fact, The
Mm-hmm.
Search for Charlie Chaplin, where they talk
Right.
about making
Oh,
unknown Chaplin and trying to hunt down all these
oh yeah.
actresses that worked with him.
Oh yes.
She was so strange,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. I remember that. Reading that.
and
Like,
she looks nothing like she did in the film. She's got this really
Oh,
weird wig
nothing.
on.
it looked like she had like plastic surgery, or her face looked a little tight.
Yeah, she looked nothing like her in 1925.
What did she go on to do after the gold rush?
Uh,
Georgia.
Mm,
I think she did a couple of movies, and then just, I think she was a dance instructor at one time, but
Hmm.
um, I don't know a lot about her after.
yeah, she taught dance and then became wealthy in real estate investments.
Now they really did have a relationship purportedly after he left Lita Gray, and what happened is he left in 1931 on 18 months seeing the world, and he never wrote her a letter, he never contacted her, and when they came back, she kind of said, you know what, I'm not I'm not dealing with this, and she broke off with him. But
Mm.
then, strangely, she claims, and I think I've mentioned this, she claims that the night before Charlie married Una, he came to her and wanted her to run away with him.
Well, since we're talking about Georgia, we can talk about City Lights. 1931, he got burned out with his actress he was working with at the time, Virginia Sherrill, who ends up in the film,
Hmm.
and does a great job. But
Oh, yeah.
he, at one point, actually fired Virginia Sherrill and brought back Georgia Hale, and he planned on reshooting all of City Lights with Georgia Hale.
Hmm.
Footage of that exists. It's on YouTube. It's on some of the DVD sets. And it just shows you how she wasn't necessarily right for that role. And it's a good thing that they didn't make that change, because it would have been a different film.
Yeah, because it almost seems to me like she's making fun of him. You know what I'm saying? Like she's in that screen test. It's like she's winking at the somebody in the flower shop, and that's how I felt watching it.
Yeah, it was kind of like that, like, snobby dance hall girl again.
Right, right. Where Virginia, even before she found out that he was the one, she was still treating him with humanity.
Yeah.
You know.
During the time of the Gold Rush, Chaplin filming that movie, he had two children.
Hmm.
Um, looks like
Chaplin Jr. and Sidney Jr.
Right.
1925 was the first,
Chaplin Jr.
Chaplin
Right.
Jr., and 1926 was Sidney.
Yeah,
Right.
Charlie Jr. I mean.
And the thing is that when when they got married, she was, I guess, about 3 or 4 months pregnant.
Yeah.
So Charlie actually showed up in May 5th, but that would mean that he was a 6-month-old baby. So Charlie actually paid off the doctor to say that he was born June 28th. And after the Gold Rush was released in the end of June, then it was announced that Lita had a baby. It was a newborn.
Yeah.
And Charlie Jr. did not find that out until like the mid 30s. His mother was drunk because she had a serious problem with alcohol, and she blurted that out to him that his birthday was actually May 5th, and I think that deeply affected him. He went to his father and talked about it. And actually, now that I think about it, it actually may have been a few years later um, but she did that because Charlie felt like if everybody did the math, 6 months he'd be buried, because then everybody would know that she had been pregnant before they got married. Because it seems like in the early Hollywoods, the press didn't really go after people as much. They kind of let people have their privacy.
Definitely not like that anymore.
No, no,
Yeah,
no.
there was a respect. There's no respect anymore. Well, I don't know if a lot of the celebrities today don't really deserve a whole lot of respect,
Right,
but there was a respect back then
right,
that just doesn't exist today. They'll walk up to you now and shove a camera in your face no matter where you are.
right.
Right.
At the end of the day, they are human beings. So, you know,
Yeah,
um,
of course. There's just so much with this film to talk about. As soon as we end this, we're going to remember something that we forgot.
well,
Probably.
I mean, we talked about,
Oh,
the spark.
90th
Oh,
anniversary. The 90th
correct.
anniversary of
Oh,
the film is this year.
Yeah.
that's right. 90 years.
I found out something interesting is that the movie premiered at what was then Grauman's Egyptian Theater. That's where it had its premiere in Los Angeles on June 26th. And then Charlie went to New York and he did a tiny bit editing. So actually, the people in Los Angeles saw a slightly different film. He did more editing, and then it was released. It had its premiere in New York. I believe it was August 16th.
When it premiered, was it a live orchestra that played with the film?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, in the bigger movie theaters, it was like Charlie's People went and was like, I suggest you play this music.
I wonder if they used the Sleeping Beauty music and the Flight of the Bumblebee, because in the 1942 version they use a lot of old classical music pieces in that
Oh yeah,
1942 version, but it's very possible they could have used that in 1925 as well. So I wonder if Charlie
right.
went back to the well and said, "Well, this worked. This worked for the original version, and it's public domain classical music. There's no reason why I can't use it again."
Yeah, he used also like some Scott Joplin in there, like popular tunes of like the 1910s that I
Yeah.
recognize.
And you and I saw the Gold Rush in Tampa.
Oh yes. I
Uh,
mean, it was just phenomenal.
Lucky.
To see that on the big screen and to, see an actual live orchestra and, it was just phenomenal. Like I said, there was a things across the country. So that version is going to be planted into people's head. We were talking at one point previously about the kid and how they edited scenes out, and the Chaplin estate or family absolutely refuses to include that. I often wonder why they would reissue the silent version, because their father had done an edit and the 1942 version is what he wanted. So,
well, it's what he wanted in 1942.
right,
That's how you have to look at that. The Chaplin family is interesting as far as the decisions that they make, because going by their rules, the silent version of the Gold Rush shouldn't be available now, but it
Right.
is,
right, right.
and I'm really thankful for that.
Oh, yeah,
I love it, but
right.
at the same time, they don't want to put the original version of the kid out because that's not the version that Charlie wanted in 1972. So I
And
think honestly, I think it's only a matter of time before the tides change on that stuff. Because at one point, like I said, when the Gold Rush was put out on VHS in the 90s, it was only the 1942 version.
Yeah.
right.
I think time fixes everything. Over time, they realize, we can have both versions on a Blu-ray now. We don't have to
Right.
choose. We can let them choose. We can give them the option.
Right.
Mm.
And you know what? I thought was really interesting. If you look at the not the credits, but it starts at the beginning of the Gold Rush, talking about who made this restoration possible, and actually Bruce Lawton Jr.'s name is in there. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. The people that were involved getting the film, restored, and
And
I
it
just
looks
thought that was pretty.
fantastic too. It
Oh
really
yeah.
does.
And I was going to mention something completely different.
That's
Oh,
okay. We can move on to something else.
All right, I was going to bring up his makeup because I think that was quite different from earlier versions of the Tramp because he had to look like he was in a detrimental state.
right, right. And
Circles under his eyes. He looks paler than usual.
right.
Like he's on the verge of death.
Mm-hmm.
Versus this like lively, upbeat Tramp from before.
He looks smaller
He
and
does.
like frail. You're right. So I mean, he had to, especially when he was in the cabin and they were starving, and he had all the dark circles around his eye.
There's a lot of little scenes in the film that are kind of coming to mind now that we're talking about it. The scene where he is in bed and his feet are out from underneath the covers, but it turns out that
Mm-hmm.
he's using it as a decoy to watch Big Jim to
Right.
make sure he doesn't eat him. And then
Yeah.
there's that scene and the one where he takes the icicles off the top of the roof and
Mm-hmm.
drops them into the pot to boil them as water. I mean,
Right.
those are just things that are just really clever.
And the thing is, that particular scene with the boots, that film Life, and that he did, and he never made, but it was included in Triple Trouble, and like the
The Flophouse.
right, in that scene, Charlie is afraid that there's a guy going around stealing money. So that's what he does. It looks like he's sleeping, but he actually has his hands in his boot, and he's, picks up the blanket and he's looking around. So
I forgot about that. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can always find things in Chaplin's films that he borrows from earlier films, and
Correct.
I think that's fun. It's fun to
Right.
discover that stuff when you're watching them.
Right.
And even though it's a different approach than being in cold, awful, terrible conditions in the Gold Rush in that little cabin, what's similar to it in ways of survival is in Shoulder Arms, where the whole like underground hole is flooded.
Right. Yeah.
All soldiers having to sleep in it
Right.
and make and that just seems just as awful in a completely different way.
And yet he interjected humor in that. The scene where Black Larson and Big Jim are fighting with the rifle, and no matter where he moves,
Oh my God,
it's pointed at it. It's pointed at him.
Like under the table, under the bed, up against the wall, anywhere.
Right. Correct.
The Gold Rush is definitely, no pun intended, the gold standard of a Chaplin film, and it is the one that he stated. Now, I'm not sure if this was actually in 1925. It might have been. He stated this was the film he wanted to be remembered for. Now, that could have just been a marketing gimmick.
But no, I posted that, like 2 or 3 years ago, and an author I won't name, kind of, called me on it. And actually, somebody on my Facebook page said that, David Robinson, and when I looked at his book, David Robinson said that throughout his life, he said that that's the one that he wanted to be remembered for. So
Now, see, I always wondered if that was a line he used. I mean, not to say that it wasn't true. That's not how he really felt. But I was always wondering if that was a line he used to let the public know that this wasn't going to be another Woman of Paris.
Right.
Like
that's possible.
The Tramp is back. Chaplin as you want to see him, and this is the film that I am most proud of ever making. That's just a really good marketing gimmick, especially in 1925 when the public was thirsty for Chaplin and was previously disappointed by the last film he put out.
And
Right.
just to clarify, was it the first United Artists film or like second or third?
It was the second. A Woman of Paris was the first, and that's
Oh,
why they were disappointed. And
Right.
the Gold Rush, made the company lots and lots of money. It was highly profitable.
It was like a repeat of the Kids' success.
Correct.
Wrapping up the Gold Rush, do you have any final thoughts on the film?
I'll always love it. That's just about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some scenes it's just so beautiful. I mean, the Dance of the Rolls, like I said, it's just one of the most beautiful scenes ever put to film. It's just lovely, and it's exciting at the end. The end of the film. The kid is my favorite, and this is definitely a second favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Gold Rush for me is timeless, and it's a classic. It's one of the best films I've ever seen, and it will continue to be because it touches on so many different subjects and issues
Right.
that can be applied even today, while also maintaining something comical at the same time.
Right.
Did you ever notice that the flop house in modern times looks a lot like the Gold Rush house?
It's like like the twin of the Gold Rush cabin.
Yeah,
Like,
you're right.
Look at it, I'm like, this is it's like Gold Rush cabin like ghost, really.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
It definitely isn't. It is not the same thing, is it?
No.
Okay.
I hope not.
Yeah.
That'd be a little too much for me.
Because Charlie shot the Gold Rush on his at his studio, where he also shot Modern Times.
Yeah.
Do you think he dismantled? Because it's very possible that Charlie could have held on to that set and reused a portion of it for Modern Times. But I mean, I guess that's up for debate.
There's one more scene that I just want to quickly mention. It's the one that Charlie cut out of the 1942, the kiss. Georgia Hale claims that's the first time that Charlie kissed her. He had been wanting to kiss her. And first of all, even though Charlie, would give Edna pecks and kisses and stuff, he never really kissed somebody until like Carmen.
I wanted to bring that up too.
Yeah.
Like that was a passionate kiss. Like,
yeah, it
very
was sexy to me.
Yeah. Very unlike the Tramp. Like,
Yes.
usually he's very flirtatious, but in like a childlike way.
Right.
Like, so that kiss is a little like scandalous.
Yeah, because
about it.
He kissed her and then he kind of went back for more, and
that was a leading man kiss.
Yeah, exactly.
If I recall correctly, the whole scene he cut out of the 1942 version, the entire ending,
right?
Wasn't that a subtle dig at Lita Gray, saying you spoiled the picture?
Maybe.
I actually heard that, but I don't know.
I mean, because I remember reading something that said by 1942 he looked at that scene and he was like, that's a little extreme. That was a little harsh. Maybe I'll just take that whole part out.
Right.
Yeah.
I really wonder how Georgia felt about that, but why he cut that out.
The end of the 1942 version is very abrupt.
Yeah, and there's a slight little funny part, because he says, and they lived happily ever after, and you see him going up the ladder, and his foot slips, but you don't see that in the original one. And it's just, I found it a tiny bit comedic, but it does kind of end different, obviously differently.
So like we said, both versions have their own merits.
Right.
Neither one is wrong or right. They're both different versions of the film, and both of them are available on the Criterion Collection DVD Blu-ray set, which came out about 2 or 3 years ago. And we know there are a lot of public domain versions of the film. So for anybody out there that's looking to check it out, definitely get the Criterion one. It's everything that you want and more. Don't waste your time on the ones that are $1 because they're garbage.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I think our question for today should be, which version do you prefer?
That always gives a spirited debate. that would be interesting.
Because I've been racking my brain over like a potential question at the end of this episode, and I think that's the best I can come up with.
No, I like it.
And definitely keep a lookout for orchestral screenings across the country, because there's been quite a few of them, and that's, oh my God, that's the way to see a Chaplin film. Well, actually, on the big screen, period, in movie theater.
So yeah, I mean that's the question we want to open up to our Modern Times Facebook page. What version of the Gold Rush do you prefer? And just give us your reasons why. Also, if you'd like to send us an audio clip of your review of the Gold Rush or your own personal story about it, as the ones we played earlier in the show regarding the kid, feel free to do so. You know, everybody has their own stories about where they first saw the Gold Rush or their opinions on it, and we'd love to hear those. So,
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
so I'll post that on the Facebook page and send that to me, and we'll get you in the next episode. Well, thanks for listening to this episode, and we really encourage you to check out the Gold Rush again after you've listened to this commentary. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Modern Times podcast. So thanks again for listening.
Bye.
Bye.